They told us earthquakes don't whisper. They strike, they shatter, they scream, but they don't whisper. And yet, one night the earth did, and I've never slept the same since. Welcome to PodPulse House, a story of tremors not recorded by any seismograph, of sounds not heard by human ears but felt deep within the bones. I'm glad you're here with me. I don't know how long I have before the signal grows too strong, before it pulls something into the surface that was never meant to rise. I've decided to document everything, for me, for you, for anyone who might care about what lies beneath the quiet places of the earth. This is PodPulse House, and this is how it began. I never used to believe in omens. I believed in data, charts, wavelengths, patterns. My world was numbers, formulas, certainty. But that changed 5 months ago, in the dead of winter, when I heard something impossible. I had just moved to the old cabin near Grafton Ridge, one of those weathered, creaking places that locals say holds stories in the floorboards. I wasn't looking for ghosts, just silence, the kind of silence you need when your mind's been loud for too long. You see, I used to map earthquakes for a living, tectonic pressure, fault lines, all of it. I've seen what happens when the earth snaps. I've walked on roads twisted like ribbon. But what happened in Grafton wasn't like that. It wasn't even close. It was a little past 2 in the morning. I remember that because I'd been staring at the old cuckoo clock on the wall, the one that didn't chime anymore, just ticked like a soft reminder that time was always moving, even when I wasn't. I couldn't sleep. There was something thick in the air, a kind of pressure in the back of my skull that made my thoughts blur together. And then I heard it, not loud, not even distinct, just wrong. A murmur beneath the floor, like gravel shifting under velvet. It wasn't wind, it wasn't pipes, it was too smooth, too deep. I felt it more than I heard it, like my bones were being used as antennae. It lasted maybe 7 seconds, then nothing, just the hum of my own breath, and the silence that follows something you can't explain. I told myself it was settling, old homes groan, maybe frost in the ground shifting, maybe my own nerves betraying me again, but it didn't feel like a creak or crack. It felt deliberate, like the earth had cleared its throat. That should have been it. But the next night, at the exact same time, it came again. This time, it was stronger. My window panes vibrated just enough to draw a hairline crack across the bottom corner of the glass. I watched it appear in real time. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, heart racing, watching that crack form like a scar across the eye of the cabin. That was the moment I stopped pretending this was my imagination. I was trained to see patterns, and something inside me knew. I had just heard the beginning of one. I dragged my old field case out of the closet, covered in dust and rust, and years of memories I'd tried to bury. Inside was my portable seismometer, analog but dependable, one I'd built with my own hands back when I still believed science could explain everything. I hadn't touched it in nearly a decade, but it felt right, like it had been waiting. I placed it in the basement, set to record continuously. I didn't expect much, maybe some subsoil vibration, maybe frost heaving. But when I analyzed the data the next morning, my stomach went cold. There it was, a low-frequency spike, just above the threshold of human hearing, 17.4 hertz. That's not an earthquake. That's not natural soil movement. That's a signal. Clean, rhythmic, like a beat, and it wasn't fading, it was growing strong. I kept recording every night, and every night the signal returned. Always around the same time, 2:04 a.m., always the same frequency range. It began to sound mechanical, almost like a machine buried deep beneath the earth, cycling to life. That's when I remembered a term we used in the field, harmonic tremor. Usually associated with volcanic activity, it's a continuous rhythmic tremor in the Earth's crust, but there were no volcanoes here. Grafton Ridge hadn't had seismic activity in over 100 years. Nothing should be vibrating at that frequency. Nothing should be repeating like that. Harmonic tremors don't talk. This one felt like it was trying to. The emotional weight of it didn't hit me until the 5th night. I'd recorded it again, stronger this time, and as I sat listening to the signal, I realized something chilling. The duration of the tremor was increasing. First it was 7 seconds, then 10, then 12, and now 18. It wasn't just repeating, it was expanding, like something trying to push through a narrow space, like the tremors were contraction. I didn't sleep after that. Not really. I'd drift in and out of consciousness, dreams mixing with static. Once I dreamed I was standing on a vast black plain, smooth as obsidian, and the only thing I could hear was that hum, that infrasound hum, rolling like thunder inside my skull. I woke up with blood trickling from my nose, just a trickle. Could have been the dry air, or something else, something closer. People talk about feeling watched. I felt listened to, like the earth had ears, and I'd said something it found interesting. And now, it was answering. But the language didn't belong to anything I'd studied, not tectonic, not anthropogenic. It was as if the planet was rehearsing a code, repeating it until someone finally paid attention. Until someone, me, finally heard it clearly. I know how this sounds. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't felt it in my chest, heard it behind my teeth, like my entire body had become an antenna tuned to something buried far too deep. I thought I came to Grafton Ridge to escape. Now I think I was drawn here, like a magnet, like bait. Because I don't think this thing, this Tremor Code, just started. I think it's been waiting for someone like me, and I think I've just answered it. They say the earth has a memory, that every footstep, every pressure, every buried secret is stored in its crust like data in a broken hard drive. That thought kept circling in my head in the days after I first recorded the signal. I couldn't stop thinking about what it meant, not just what it was, but why it had started. Why now? Why me? I've spent my entire career analyzing the Earth's behavior, charting its fractures, reading its rhythms like a language, always assuming that nature was indifferent, that it didn't care if we were listening. But after those first nights, after the whisper, after the bone-deep hum, I realized that indifference wasn't what I was hearing. It was intent. I remember the morning it finally hit me. I was reviewing the waveform data again, thinking I'd find something I missed. I'd barely slept, barely eaten. My hands shook from too much caffeine and too little blood sugar, but I had to be sure. And then it happened. The signal pattern that had felt so random, so elusive, suddenly clicked into a rhythm. 61 minutes, that was the interval. Not 60, not 62, exactly 61 minutes between each recorded vibration. It was like a biological pulse, like a heartbeat, not fast, not frantic, but steady, measured, alive. At that moment, something in me shifted. Curiosity became fixation, obsession. I needed to know where it was coming from. I calibrated my old field gear, linked it to 3 separate geophones I buried around the property. It took me hours to align the data, to triangulate the pulses with some degree of accuracy. I laid it all out in my journal, page after page of hastily scribbled math, and when I finally drew the lines and found the point of origin, a cold sweat broke across my back. The source was less than 3 miles away, near the edge of Grafton Ridge, an old slope not even charted on modern maps. The terrain was steep, heavily forested, and riddled with what the locals used to call bone pits, sinkholes formed by soft limestone caving in under pressure. Most people avoided that stretch because it was unstable. I knew that. I'd walked the boundary once before just to clear my head. I'd never stepped beyond the old timber fence. But now I knew something was underneath it, something rhythmic, something calling out. I strapped my field recorder to my back, packed extra batteries, and headed out. The woods were unnaturally quiet that morning. The birds didn't call. The air was still. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. And I, like a fool or a prophet, walked straight into its lungs. It took me almost an hour to reach the zone. The forest floor changed gradually, from loose pine needles to hard-packed clay to something else. Earth that felt hollow. I couldn't describe it any other way. Each step echoed just slightly off, like there was too much give beneath the soil. I stopped when my geophone readout started pulsing again. The signal had returned, strong, steady, unmistakable. I was standing directly above. I dropped to my knees and placed my palm on the dirt, and I swear to you, I felt it. A pulse, not a tremor. A pulse. Like something massive, slow, and breathing was moving far below. And when the pulse passed through me, I didn't just feel it. I saw something in my mind. A brief, intrusive flash of a deep stone chamber. circular, carved with patterns that didn't belong to anything human. It was gone in an instant, but it left me shaking. I stayed there for nearly 20 minutes, trying to convince myself this wasn't madness, that I hadn't stumbled into some psychological break from isolation. But the data was real. The signal was measurable, and when I pressed my microphone to the ground, the waveform that came through was nearly perfect. Clean frequencies, resonant peaks, structured noise. I knew what that meant. Natural tremors are chaotic. But this had architecture. It had order. I began to wonder, what if this wasn't just some geological anomaly? What if it was evidence of something beneath us? Not a fault line, not magma, but a machine, a chamber, a structure. Something buried long before our maps, pulsing with a purpose we couldn't understand. The rational part of me hated that idea, but the signal kept coming, stronger, clearer, each cycle more defined than the last. Then something happened I didn't expect. The signal changed pitch, just slightly, but enough to alter the pattern. It went higher, almost imperceptible, but distinct enough that my sensors caught it. And with that shift came another image in my head, not a dream, not a hallucination, just a sensation of being watched, not from above, from below, as if something buried was suddenly aware that I was aware of it. I left the ridge shaking. I didn't even pack up my equipment properly. I stumbled back through the forest like a drunk, legs weak, vision blurred. When I got home, I collapsed on the floor and sobbed, not from fear, not entirely, but from something deeper. The kind of primal emotion that comes when you realize the ground beneath you, something you've trusted your entire life, isn't what you thought it was. I kept replaying the moment I touched the soil, the warmth that passed through it, the impossible pulse that ran up my arm. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a message. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like it had been waiting, not randomly, specifically, waiting for someone who could hear it, someone who would listen. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a new signal. It wasn't some recent phenomenon. No, this thing, whatever it was, had been transmitting for a very, very long time. But maybe no one had been listening on the right frequency. Maybe no one had stayed still long enough. Maybe the earth is always speaking, but we're always too loud to hear it. And now, after all these years, it's found someone who's finally quiet enough to listen. So that's where I am now. Sitting in this cabin, maps spread across my table, signal still humming softly through my headphones like a heartbeat I've adopted as my own. The source is clear. The direction is fixed. But the purpose? The purpose remains unknown. And that's what haunts me most. Because if the earth is speaking, who or what is it speaking to? There's a kind of madness and obsession. I've always known that. Everyone knows that. But this felt different. I'd been drawn into something I didn't understand, and the more I tried to rationalize it, the deeper I was sinking into something I couldn't get out of. I've spent days, maybe weeks, just staring at the data, trying to make sense of it. The same patterns, the same rhythm, pulsing every 61 minutes like clockwork, like the breath of some ancient creature buried beneath the earth. My seismometer sat on the table next to me, its screen flickering with the same data, its readings mocking me in their consistency. No matter what I did, no matter how many times I ran the numbers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, being pulled deeper into something far older than I could fathom. I kept staring at the waveforms, tracing the pulses over and over again. At first, it was just the rhythmic hum, repeating, constant, but soon I began to notice subtle changes. There were fluctuations, small, almost imperceptible shifts in frequency that I couldn't explain. I had to get closer. I had to understand. So, I recalibrated everything. I increased the resolution of my recordings, narrowed the time window, and that's when it hit me. The pattern was structured, not in the random way that a natural tremor would be, not in the chaotic bursts you get from a landslide or a volcanic eruption, but in a way that was deliberate, intentional. Each pulse wasn't just a random fluctuation in the Earth's crust. It was a series of bursts, each separated by a specific interval. I could see it now. The pulses weren't just coming at regular intervals. They were forming something more. A kind of rhythm that wasn't just seismic. It was something coded. I froze as I looked at the data, realizing I was dealing with something more than just vibrations in the ground. It was like trying to decipher a language, not human, not animal, but something else, something that could be interpreted in a way that went beyond the usual seismic activity. I ran the numbers through every algorithm I knew, every piece of software I could get my hands on, and still, no matter what I did, the result kept coming back to the same thing, a cycle, a loop. It wasn't just random, it was purposeful, a signal. It was then that I made the decision. I had to go back to the source, to the ridge, to the place where the pulse had first emerged. There was something calling to me from the ground, something that needed to be understood. It wasn't just a signal, it was a question, a message, and I needed to hear the rest of it. I spent the next few days preparing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I'd been looking at the problem all wrong. I'd been focusing on the wrong kind of data. Seismic data was useful, but it wasn't enough. I needed something deeper, something that could bridge the gap between what I was hearing and what I could feel. The tremors were only a small part of this puzzle. I needed a wider net. So, I expanded my equipment, brought in new sensors, all calibrated to pick up not just seismic activity, but magnetic fields, sound waves, anything that could possibly give me more of a clue. The moment I set out for the ridge, I could feel it again, the same pressure, the same weight in the air. It was like something was pressing down on me, like I was walking into a storm that hadn't quite arrived, but was just waiting for the right moment to hit. The trees around me seemed taller, darker, the shadows deeper. The path I was following had grown more unfamiliar, the ground softer beneath my boots, almost like it was shifting. I tried to shake it off, tried to focus on the task at hand, but every step I took seemed to draw me further into something I couldn't fully comprehend. The ridge was just as I remembered, except now it felt different. The place had a heaviness to it, as though it was holding its breath. The wind had died down completely, and for the first time since I arrived, the air was still, no rustling leaves, no sounds of animals, just the steady thrum of my heartbeat in my chest, the only sound I could hear, steady and persistent. I set up my equipment again, geophones, sensors, the whole array, more sensitive this time, more precise. I needed more data, something that could explain what I was feeling, and as I worked, I couldn't help but notice the way the air seemed to hum, just slightly. At first I thought it was just the wind, but it wasn't. It was constant. It was too deep to be from any human source, too steady to be natural. The air itself was vibrating. I felt it in my teeth, in my bones. Then it came again. The pulse. But this time it was stronger. It was clearer. It was more direct. The rhythm it followed had changed slightly, just enough that I could hear it in my head. It was like a heartbeat, slow, deep, deliberate. I held my breath, feeling it pass through me, through the ground, through the air. I realized that I wasn't just standing on the earth, I was standing in it. This wasn't just a signal, this wasn't just some anomaly beneath the surface. This was the earth speaking. No, not speaking. This was the earth trying to speak, and I was finally listening. As the pattern unfolded before me, I could feel the weight of it. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just the earth shifting. There was intent behind this. Something, or someone, was trying to communicate, trying to send a message through the frequency, through the pulse. The signal wasn't just coded in the earth's vibrations. It was coded in time, in frequency, in the very fabric of the soil. Each pulse carried with it a fragment of something older, something that couldn't be understood in human terms. I began to map the pulses, tracking their fluctuations, comparing them to the surrounding seismic data, looking for any anomalies. I had to focus. I had to make sense of the changes, the way the signal was shifting, becoming more refined. But the deeper I went, the more I realized that the pattern wasn't just a message. It was a key to something buried, something that had been hidden long before my time, long before any human could have set foot on this land. I've been chasing this pattern for weeks now, following it down into the very heart of the earth. But every time I think I'm getting closer to understanding, the signal shifts again. It changes. It evades me, always just out of reach. And it's maddening. But now, more than ever, I know that this pattern isn't random. It's not some trick of nature. It's something alive, something deliberate, and it's reaching out to me, to us. But why? What does it want me to find? There are moments in life when you come across something you weren't meant to find. Something hidden, buried, waiting for the right person to uncover it. And sometimes in those moments you realize that what you're holding in your hands is more than just a piece of history or a relic. It's a warning, a guide, a key to something you don't yet fully understand. I didn't know it then, not at first, but that's what the map was, a warning. It came to me by chance, like most things do when you least expect it. I had been digging through old records in a storage unit, trying to find anything that could explain the signal or offer a clue to its origins. There's a small, dusty archive near the edge of town, forgotten by most, but I had heard whispers about it. Old surveyors' notes, outdated geological reports, maps from a time when the land was wilder, untouched by modern developments. And as I sifted through the files, I came across a bundle of yellowed papers, its edges frayed, as if it had been passed down through generations. At first glance, it looked like any other old map, crude, imprecise, with hand-drawn lines and annotations that seemed more like scribbles than anything useful. But something about the way the ink bled into the paper made me stop. I spread the map across the table, tracing the rough lines with my fingers, and that's when I saw it. There, in the far corner of the map, was a symbol. It was subtle, almost hidden among the crisscrossing contours and rivers, but it was unmistakable. A circle, surrounded by intersecting lines that formed a kind of web. It wasn't like anything I had seen before, not in any geological chart, not in any standard survey. It was like a diagram, a blueprint, and right in the center of the circle was a mark, a single word, written in faded letters, Nox. I hadn't seen that word before, and it didn't belong to any language I knew. But it felt significant, felt like it was waiting for someone to notice it. The rest of the map was equally odd. The terrain was all wrong, a twisted, fragmented version of the land I recognized. Mountains where there should have been valleys, lakes where rivers had once flowed. The scale of the map was off too. The distances didn't quite add up, but that wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was that in the center of all this confusion, there was a spot marked with a small dark X, a location that was eerily close to the ridge I had been investigating. The coordinates weren't anything special at first glance, but the fact that the map seemed to match the pattern I had been tracking was no coincidence. The X was right where the pulse, the signal, had originated, right in the heart of the anomaly. I felt the weight of it in my chest, like a tight knot, as if the earth itself had started to pull me toward it, like I was being drawn into the very center of this mystery. I couldn't ignore it. I knew that now. There was something hidden there, something old, something waiting. I had to go back. I had to follow this map, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn away. The logic of it all, the rational part of me, was telling me I was being drawn into a trap, that this was all some kind of wild, paranoid delusion. But I couldn't stop myself. The map had spoken to me in a way that I couldn't explain, and when I looked at it, I didn't just see ink on paper. I saw a path, a way forward, a direction that led me deeper into the unknown. The next morning, I packed my gear again. I felt like I was moving in a trance, almost mechanically, as though I wasn't fully in control of my own actions. I tried to remind myself of the dangers, the risks involved in following an ancient, mysterious map to a place that had never been properly charted. But those warnings felt distant, like echoes from someone else's life. It didn't matter. I had to go. I had to know what was there. The ridge was quieter than I remembered. The air was still, oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. I felt the pressure in my chest again, that same feeling I had before. It was as though the land was alive, watching me. I followed the coordinates from the map, each step feeling heavier than the last, the ground beneath me almost resisting my every movement, as though I were stepping into some forgotten territory where I didn't belong. And yet the further I went, the more sure I became that this was where I was meant to be. The spot the map marked was so close now, just a few hundred yards ahead, beyond the tree line, where the ground started to slope downward into a narrow ravine. My heartbeat quickened, matching the rhythm of the pulses I had felt before, that deep, resonant hum beneath the earth. When I reached the location, I stopped. The air was colder here, colder than it should have been, considering the time of year. I could feel the temperature drop, a chill that settled deep into my bones. I looked around and saw nothing. No signs of an old ruin or structure, no obvious markers, no sign of anything that stood out, just trees, moss, and the dense undergrowth of the forest. But then, as I looked closer, I saw it. At the base of a massive, gnarled oak tree, the earth was disturbed, as if something had been buried there. The soil was loose, uneven, a jagged hole half covered with roots and leaves. Without thinking, I knelt down and began to dig. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe some relic left behind by an old settler or a hunter. But what I uncovered was nothing like that. Beneath the surface, my hands scraped against something hard, something metallic, a rusted piece of iron shaped like a small door. It was covered in dirt, but the edges were smooth, polished even. I wiped away more soil, pulling it free from the ground. The door was part of a larger structure, and I could feel the weight of it. Ancient, heavy, like it had been buried for centuries. As I cleared away the last of the dirt, I saw something that made my heart race. The same symbol from the map, the same circle with intersecting lines, was carved into the metal. My pulse quickened, the blood rushing in my ears. I had found it. I had found the heart of it all. The pulse beneath the earth, the source, the signal. And now I was standing at the threshold of whatever it was. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, or if I would even be able to make sense of any of this, but I knew one thing for certain. I had crossed a line. There was no turning back. Whatever was buried beneath that door wasn't just a relic of the past. It was something alive. It was something waiting to be awakened. And I was the one who had opened the door. The question now was, what was going to happen next? I don't know what I expected to happen when I uncovered that metal door, but it certainly wasn't what came next. At first, there was just the sound of my own breath, heavy and ragged in the stillness of the forest. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that I had been mistaken, that this was just another artifact of a forgotten world, nothing more than rusted metal and old dreams. But when I touched the door, when my fingers grazed the symbol that had haunted my thoughts for days, I felt something shift. It was as if the earth itself had responded to my touch, a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor in the ground beneath me, like the echo of a breath held for far too long. I should have been afraid. I should have turned and run as far as I could, leaving this whole twisted, inexplicable thing behind me. But instead, I did what any fool would do. I pressed on. There was something compelling about it, something pulling me in, urging me to go deeper, to see what lay beneath, to unlock whatever was hidden in the depths of this strange, forgotten place. I ran my hands over the surface of the metal, tracing the intricate symbols carved into its edges. The design was familiar, yet alien, like a language I was meant to understand but couldn't quite decipher. I had seen this symbol on the map, but now it felt more than just a mark. It felt like a key, like it was meant to unlock something far older than me, something that had been waiting for centuries to be awakened. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that door, but eventually my fingers found a seam, a narrow gap between the metal panels. My heart raced as I gently pried at the edges, feeling the coldness of the metal against my skin. At first, nothing happened. The door resisted, stuck in place by years of neglect and decay. But then, with a sound that could only be described as a groan, it gave way. The hinges creaked, and the door slowly, reluctantly, began to swing open. And when it did, I felt the world shift beneath me. The air around me seemed to thicken, heavy and charged, like a storm was brewing, even though the sky was clear, the forest silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I could feel the pulse, the same rhythmic hum that had guided me from the very beginning, growing louder, more distinct, as if it was coming from the depths below. It was no longer just a sound in the background, no longer just a faint vibration I could ignore. It was in my bones now, resonating deep within me, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient, something that had been waiting beneath the surface for longer than anyone could imagine. As the door creaked open wider, I glimpsed what lay beyond. At first it was hard to make out through the dim light filtering down into the hole, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw it, a narrow staircase, spiraling down into the darkness below. The steps were carved from stone, worn by time, covered in a thin layer of moss, but they were unmistakable. This was no natural formation. This was something built, designed, with purpose, with intention. And I knew in that moment that I had found what I had been searching for, the source of the signal, the place where it all began. I hesitated, standing at the threshold, my hands still gripping the edge of the door. The pulse was louder now, almost deafening, reverberating through the stone beneath my feet, filling my chest, my head, my very thoughts. It was overwhelming, like a force trying to push me down into the earth, trying to pull me into whatever lay at the bottom of that stairwell. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't walk away. Something inside me, something I couldn't explain, was pushing me forward, urging me to descend, to uncover the secrets that had been buried for so long. I took a step, then another, and slowly made my way down the stairs. The deeper I went, the colder it became, the air growing thicker, denser, until it felt like I was breathing underwater. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, each exhale freezing in the air before dissipating into the stillness around me. The walls of the stairwell were narrow, the stone rough against my fingertips as I ran them along the edges, steadying myself. The pulse, the hum beneath the earth, grew stronger with every step, like the very ground was alive, waiting for me to reach the bottom, to reach the heart of it all. And then, at last, I reached the bottom. There, in the center of the chamber, was a massive stone altar, covered in moss and dust, but unmistakable in its form. It was old, older than anything I had seen, older than anything I could comprehend. The altar was surrounded by intricate carvings, symbols that matched those on the map, those same strange marks I had followed from the very beginning. They seemed to glow faintly, as if they were etched not just into the stone but into the fabric of the world itself, pulsing in time with the signal, the rhythm that had led me here. I stepped closer to the altar, my heart pounding in my chest, and for the first time since I had uncovered the door, I felt fear, real fear, not the kind that comes from uncertainty or doubt, but the kind that grips you when you realize that you've gone too far, that you've crossed a line you can't uncross. This was not just a discovery. It was not just a mystery waiting to be solved. No, this was something bigger. This was the beginning of something I could no longer control. The pulse had led me here, yes, but what would happen now? What had I awakened? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. The world I had known, the safe, predictable world of data and equations, had just been shattered. And in its place was something far more dangerous, far more real than I could have ever imagined. The signal had been a warning, a call to action, and I was its messenger. I stood there, staring at the altar, knowing that whatever came next, I would be a part of it. There was no turning back now. This is Episode 1, Part 1 of Tremor Code. The journey is just beginning, and what comes next is even more unpredictable. Stay tuned for the next part of this story. If you're as intrigued as I am, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to PodPulse House for more of this journey. Remember, the truth doesn't always come easily, but it's worth seeking. Keep searching, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep listening. We'll see you in the next episode.